Being here, we're going to move on to our next presentation. Thanks for your work. If you can follow up with us on those community aspects that Representative Greenman was talking about, and we'll be aware of you as a resource. Thank you. So Aaron Rosenthal from North Star Policy Action, if you can make your way up. And once you get settled in, I'll ask you to identify yourself and proceed. I will note that we've got a report in our packets and online report and some documents as well. A joint report, it looks like, from North Star Policy Action, the University of St. Thomas, talking about the impact of generative AI in the Minnesota job market. And get your presentation up. There's also a one-pager with us as well. And again, members of the public, I believe these are all online on our website.
All righty, thank you.
Please.
Co-Chair Pinto, Co-Chair Baker, members, for the record, I'm Aaron Rosenthal. I'm the Research Director at North Star Policy Action. We are a think tank dedicated to improving the lives of working Minnesotans. I am so glad that this committee is talking about this issue today. We are, I think, on the precipice of a 21st century industrial revolution, and we are, as a state, woefully unprepared to meet the moment. I want to start by talking a little bit about context and capacity of AI. The previous presentation mentioned how rapidly this technology is advancing. If we look back about a year and a half ago, frontier models of generative AI were beating out industry experts around 10% of the time. Fast forward a little over a year, it was closer to 40% of the time that generative models were beating industry experts, and some models like Claude are pretty close to 50%, which means when it comes to frontier generative AI models, they are at parity, roughly, with what industry experts can produce. As capacity rises, so too does adoption. Not surprisingly, companies are increasingly finding these tools useful. If we look back to 2017, about 20% of US companies were utilizing AI. That's closer to 80% today. Generative AI, things like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, which really came on the scene in 2023. We see about a third of companies utilizing that 2 years ago. Today, again, closer to 80%. So capacity adoption is rising quickly. As that happens, what we're seeing is a more and more anxious workforce. So if we look at what are people's concerns about AI, and people have a lot of concerns about AI, things around misinformation, privacy, but the number one concern is how AI will impact people's jobs. That is where people are most concerned, and this is not a partisan issue. I don't know of another issue where Republicans and Democrats seem more aligned in the general public on the idea that AI is a concerning thing. They are more concerned than excited about this. And again, it looks the same for Democrats and Republicans. Now, this isn't just about workers being concerned about AI taking their job. That is obviously part of the concern, but there are also particular areas where workers are expressing anxiety. One of them is in AI making important decisions, things like a hiring decision, for example, where AI is deciding who gets a job. Another is in surveillance, the degree to which AI is being used to monitor workers and track their movements while at their job. So as we've seen, workers are increasingly anxious, and in response to that anxiety, they are asking for the government to do something. There are overwhelming majorities of Americans who have said that they want to see greater regulation of AI, and importantly, even if it means slowing down AI innovation. Now, I want to state that I'm of the belief that we don't need to see these two as in competition with each other. AI innovation does not need to be in opposition to AI regulation. I firmly believe that we can actually regulate in AI in a way that allows AI innovation to continue, but it's telling, I think, that people are saying, even if it means slowing down AI, we want to see more regulations in place. Despite these calls from people to see more government intervention, we are seeing relative legislative inactivity. In Minnesota, as you'll see on this slide, we've passed a few pieces of legislation related to AI, though nothing in relation to the workforce, which again is why it's particularly exciting to see a hearing in this committee on this topic. By contrast, other states have done more. If you look at Illinois, close to us in the Midwest, they have passed several pieces of legislation on AI and labor. But again, this is not a Democrat and Republican issue. Texas has passed substantially more AI legislation than the state of Minnesota has passed. Now, the study that we did on AI in relation to the Minnesota workforce asked a relatively simple question. This was with Dr. Rege, who's the director for the Center of Applied AI at St. Thomas. And we looked at how many workers in Minnesota have high exposure to generative AI, which meant generative AI could do 50% or more of their job. And when we ask that simple question, what we find is that roughly a third of Minnesota workers, over 800,000 people in Minnesota, are in these high Gen AI exposure jobs. If we look at very high exposure, where generative AI could do 75% or more of a worker's job, it's a little over 100,000 workers in that position. This makes Minnesota the most vulnerable workforce in the Midwest and the 10th most vulnerable workforce in the country. What that means is that Minnesota workers are disproportionately in jobs where generative AI is threatening, where generative AI could do a substantial amount of their work. Things like software developers, analysts, right? These are all jobs where we're seeing generative AI capacity increase. Now, what I would say is these numbers indicate to us that we are at a precipice. There are two future paths that lie in front of us. One is filled with worker displacement, with exploitation, with inequality, with concentrations of wealth going to people who are developing these AI models. But worker exposure to AI does not have to mean job displacement. It can actually mean increased job satisfaction. And that is the alternative path that I would suggest we can move down, but one that is going to require intervention from the state government. So one thing to understand about these estimates, and one reason that I'm particularly concerned, is we should understand these are conservative estimates to say that a third of workers are going to be impacted. We are looking at just generative AI, so things like ChatGPT. That does not include AI that might drive cars and trucks, for example. So those who have concerns about things like Waymo, we're not talking about that here, right? This is just generative AI. The other thing to understand is that AI, of course, is rapidly advancing in its technological capacity, moving from an AI that talks to you, which is what generative AI does, responds to particular prompts, to agentic AI, which is AI that does tasks for you, where you could say, for example, go build me a website, go write really complex code for me. The AI agents go off for hours and complete these tasks and then come back to you. That is where we are headed. So if we think that AI is in a position to displace a number of workers today, I can guarantee you the number will be higher tomorrow. It's cliche to say it, but it is true. The AI we have today is the worst it will ever be. It will be better tomorrow, and if we come back next year, it will be substantially better. The current capacity of AI is doubling roughly every 7 months. That should scare you a little bit, or at least it scares me. And what we should understand in looking back is that the history of humanity is filled with these kinds of technological changes. AI is not new. It comes in the line of the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the computer revolution. And in each case, in all of those revolutions, what we have seen are these moments of disruption. And in these moments of disruption, what we generally see is high levels of concentrated wealth and worker exploitation. If we want this time to be different, we have to act differently. And that means creating countervailing forces that can act back against that kind of concentrated wealth and worker exploitation. The only thing that will make AI different than past revolutionary processes is that it is going to happen faster and it may be broader. The Industrial Revolution took decades to play out. The AI revolution may be the CEO of Anthropic recently predicted that half of entry-level white-collar jobs may be gone in the next 1 to 5 years. So that is the kind of timescale that we're talking about. If we do want this time to be different, there are some things that we should be thinking about. The first is, again, making sure that there is this countervailing force that can fight back against AI exploitation and wealth concentration. And that means boosting the capacity of workers to make sure that they have a voice in how AI is implemented. And the example here that we can turn to is what happened in California a couple of years ago with the writers' strike. Now, writers of movies and film and television in Hollywood were very concerned about AI and the idea that it could put them out of a job, could just write full scripts. What they did, because they had the ability to collectively bargain over this issue, was say, we're going to be in a position to use AI, but AI cannot write full scripts and put us out of a job. The result is that writers now have more fulfilling jobs. They're more productive. That productivity means that the studios that employ them also make more money. And all of us, of course, benefit by having more television and movies that we can utilize to distract ourselves from robots coming and taking over our lives. Beyond just boosting worker power and allowing workers to have voice in AI implementation, there are 3 particular areas I would recommend focusing on, what I've called the 3 Ds of AI risk for workers. The first is digital surveillance, so making sure that workers are protected from invasive data collection, right? So making sure, for example, that AI models are not able to predict and make decisions based on somebody being pregnant, that it's not able to interfere in workers' capacity to collectively bargain, that any kind of data being collected by AI is directly related to job capacity. The second is prohibiting AI from making important employment decisions. I talked earlier about the idea of AI being able to make final hiring choices, so prohibiting that kind of use. But we've also seen AI models capable of identifying levels of consumer debt that people might be carrying, and then offering lower wages to those people who are carrying lower debt. Representative Greenman talked about surveillance pricing. We also need to be thinking about surveillance wages, which is the other side of that equation. And then finally, displacement. So preparing workers for transitions in the workplace. I think it is very unclear at this point the degree to which we are going to see displacement, but it is very possible and the scale is potentially huge. We need to be in a position where workers have advanced warning if they're going to be losing their jobs to AI, and that there are incentives in place to ensure that we have the kind of retraining and reskilling programs in place to allow for transitions to take place without widespread economic harm. So I'll close just by again saying how excited I am that this committee is taking up this issue and would welcome any questions at this time.
Thank you so much for your work and for that terrific presentation, really helpful. We will, first question from Representative Johnson W.
Thank you, Mr.